My beloved child, stop scrolling for a moment. Do not rush past these words. What you are about to hear was meant to find you at a moment when your heart is quiet enough to recognize something your mind has been trying to avoid. There is a hidden story behind the silence you have been feeling. A story you could not see because it has been unfolding somewhere beyond your reach, behind closed doors, behind unread messages, behind the strange distance that appeared where warmth once lived. And tonight, in this fictional spiritual message, imagine heaven pulling back the veil for just a moment, not to frighten you, not to condemn anyone, but to show you what regret can do to a human heart when love is present. Truth is delayed, and fear becomes stronger than courage. My beloved child, there is someone whose name your heart may still remember without permission, someone you may have tried to forget, someone you may have convinced yourself was no longer thinking about you, and yet, in this story, while you were trying to understand the silence, they were fighting a battle inside themselves that you could not see. You thought they were distant because they stopped caring. You thought perhaps they had moved on. You wondered whether someone else had taken your place. You replayed conversations, searched for hidden meanings in ordinary words, and asked yourself what changed, but there was something they were carrying. Something they were afraid to say, something that became heavier every time they imagined your face. Pause here, because the next part matters. In this fictional message, your soulmate has entered a season of profound emotional darkness. They are not simply sad. They are overwhelmed by regret, shame, confusion, and the consequences of a truth they have been postponing, and somewhere inside that darkness is one sentence they keep repeating: I should have told them. Again and again, should have told them. They imagine the conversation, they imagine you standing in front of them, they imagine the moment your expression changes, they imagine your questions, they imagine your silence. They imagine you asking why they waited, and every time the imagined conversation reaches that moment, they cannot bear to continue, so they retreat, they disappear, they tell themselves they need more time. Then another day passes, then another, and the secret becomes larger than the person carrying it. My child, sometimes people do not run from love because they feel nothing. Sometimes, in stories like this, they run because they feel too much. They are terrified of losing the person whose opinion matters most. They are terrified that honesty will destroy the last thread connecting them to the one person they still secretly hope will understand. And that is where this story becomes deeper than romance. Because the hidden truth is not merely about what happened, it is about why they could not speak. There are moments when a human being receives news that changes the way they see their own future. A medical result, a diagnosis, a test result they never expected, a sentence from a doctor that echoes long after the appointment ends, and suddenly, everything that once seemed important becomes strangely small. The future they imagined feels uncertain, the words they wanted to say suddenly feel impossible, and in this fictional story, that is what happened to them. They tested positive for something that terrified them, and before you allow your imagination to turn that sentence into certainty about a real person, remember this is a fictional spiritual narrative, created to explore the emotional weight of secrecy, regret, and love, but inside the story, they did not know how to tell you. That is the wound, not simply the result, the silence, the delay, the fear, the unbearable question of whether you would still look at them with love after hearing the truth. My beloved child, have you ever wondered why someone can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone? That is where they are. In this story, they laugh when they have to, they answer when someone calls, they move through ordinary days pretending that everything is normal, but when the room becomes quiet, the performance disappears. And the thoughts return, your face returns, your voice returns, the memories return, the moments they took for granted return with an almost painful clarity. They remember the way you looked at them when you trusted them. They remember the conversations where you gave them opportunities to be honest. They remember moments when they could have spoken, and they remember choosing silence. That is what haunts them. Not because silence protected them, but because silence only postponed the inevitable. There is something haunting about realizing that the conversation you were afraid to have yesterday may become even harder tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes another tomorrow, until the distance itself becomes a wall. My child, perhaps you have felt that wall. Perhaps you have wondered why someone who once felt so close suddenly became unreachable. Perhaps you sensed something had changed before you had any evidence. Perhaps there were nights when your heart whispered, "Something is wrong." And then your mind argued back, "You are imagining things." You tried to be rational, you tried to move forward, you tried to accept the silence, but every once in a while, something brought them back into your thoughts. A song, a place, a photograph, a familiar phrase, a dream, a memory that appeared without warning, and you asked yourself why. Why now? Why do I still feel something? Why does this story feel unfinished? My beloved child, in this fictional message, the story is unfinished because they never gave you the truth. And secrets have a strange way of keeping emotional doors half open. You can walk away physically, you can stop talking, you can delete a number, you can convince yourself that you have moved on. But when something important was never spoken, the heart may continue waiting for an ending the mind cannot manufacture. And theirs has been waiting too, but there is something they have not told anyone, something even more painful than the result itself. They regret not telling you before the distance became so large. They regret every opportunity they allowed to pass. They regret every time you reached toward them emotionally and they stepped backward. They regret every unanswered question, every delayed response, every cold moment that was actually fear disguised as indifference. And this is where the story takes a turn, because their depression is not portrayed here as a romantic sign of love, nor as proof that someone is secretly destined to return. Depression is serious, and real people experiencing it deserve compassion and professional support, but in this fictional story, their emotional collapse has forced them to confront something they spent months trying to escape. They cannot run from the truth forever, and neither can you, not necessarily because they are coming back, not necessarily because everything will be repaired. Listen carefully. There is a difference between someone regretting what they did and someone being ready to make things right. Those are not the same thing, and heaven, in this story, does not ask you to ignore that difference. You are not being asked to become someone's savior. You are not being asked to abandon your boundaries. You are not being asked to accept deception simply because someone is suffering. Love without wisdom can become another form of pain, and wisdom without compassion can become another kind of prison. You are being asked to understand what regret looks like when it has nowhere to go. Because sometimes regret does not knock on the door. Sometimes it sits silently outside it. Sometimes it writes a message and deletes it. Sometimes it opens your profile and closes it again. Sometimes it types, "I need to tell you something," and then stares at those words until the screen goes dark. That is the kind of silence this story is describing. And tonight, the silence is beginning to crack. Something inside them has changed. They are no longer able to pretend that avoiding the conversation is protecting you. They are beginning to realize that withholding the truth also took something from you. It took away your ability to make informed choices. It took away the opportunity to respond with your own voice. It left you standing in a story whose most important page had been hidden, and that realization is crushing them. My beloved child, there is a moment coming in this story that they have imagined hundreds of times. They imagine finally standing before you. No excuses, no carefully constructed explanation, no pretending, just the truth. They imagine looking into your eyes and saying what they should have said long ago. I was afraid. Not I didn't care. Not I forgot. Not I moved on. I was afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of judgment, afraid of losing you. Afraid that one confession would erase every beautiful memory you shared, afraid that you would look at them differently. Afraid that you would ask the question they could never answer without shame, "Why didn't you tell me?" And there it is, the question that keeps returning, "Why didn't you tell me?" They have no perfect answer, because sometimes fear does not need logic. Fear simply takes the steering wheel. It convinces someone that postponing a difficult truth is better than facing it. Then the postponement becomes deception. The deception becomes distance. The distance becomes loneliness. And loneliness becomes regret. That is the chain they are trapped inside in this fictional story. But something is about to break that chain, not because a miracle will erase consequences, not because heaven will force two people back together. Something changes because truth eventually becomes heavier than fear. My child, perhaps you have been waiting for a sign, perhaps you have asked the universe, God, heaven, or your own heart for an answer. Was I imagining the connection? Did it mean anything to them? Why did they leave like that? Why did they become so different? And maybe the answer you needed was never a simple yes or no. Maybe the deeper answer is that another person's silence cannot determine your worth. Their fear cannot define your beauty. Their secrecy cannot rewrite the love you gave honestly. Their mistakes cannot become the measure of who you are. You were never foolish for caring. You were never weak because you hoped. You were never wrong for believing that honesty mattered. And if this story feels painfully personal, let it remind you of something important. Fictional spiritual messages can stir real emotions, but real-life medical concerns require real medical guidance. testing, and honest communication, not signs, predictions, or supernatural certainty. Still, inside this cinematic story, heaven is not finished revealing what happened, because the test result was only the beginning. The real story began afterward, after they left the room, after they received the news, after the first wave of fear, after the denial, after the questions, after they realized there was one person they could not stop thinking about. You. They remembered something you once said, a simple sentence, something you probably forgot, but they didn't, and that sentence became an echo inside their mind. It changed the way they looked at everything. They began wondering whether they had misunderstood what love actually required. They had believed love meant protecting someone from painful information. Now they were beginning to understand that sometimes love means trusting another person enough to let them decide what they can handle, and that realization opened a wound they could no longer close. My beloved child, there is one more thing you need to know before this part of the story ends. The person you think is avoiding the truth may actually be standing at the edge of a decision. One path leads deeper into silence, the other leads toward confession, and neither path is easy. They know that if they speak, everything may change. They know you may walk away. They know you may become angry. They know you may never forgive them. But for the first time, they are beginning to understand something even more frightening than losing you. Living forever with the knowledge that they never gave you the truth. So tonight, in this fictional story, they are holding their phone. Your name is somewhere nearby. The message has been written, not once, several times. They have changed the first sentence again and again. I need to tell you something. Delete. I'm sorry. Delete, please hear me out. Delete, I should have told you sooner. Delete, then their hands stop, because they realize there is no perfect opening for an imperfect truth. There is only honesty, and as their finger moves toward the screen, something happens that they did not expect. They see your face in their mind. Not the angry version, not the disappointed version, the version from before everything became complicated, the version that believed them, the version that trusted them. And for the first time in a long time, they begin to cry, not because they know what will happen next, but because they finally understand what their silence has cost. And just when you think this is where the confession begins, the message disappears, their phone goes dark, they look at the ceiling, and whisper the words they have been too afraid to say aloud. I don't know how to tell them. But somewhere beyond that fear, another thought rises, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. Then tell the truth. And that is where this story stops, for now, because the next moment is the one they have been running from, the moment when the truth can no longer remain hidden, the moment when your name appears on their screen, the moment when the message finally sends, and what they wrote in those final words is not what you would expect. Not an excuse, not a romantic promise, not a request for you to save them, something else, something that could change the way you understand the entire silence between you, something they have never told you before, and when you discover what those words say, you may finally understand why they disappeared when you needed answers the most. The message is still there, waiting. And the next part of this story begins with the first line they finally found the courage to send. The first line they finally found the courage to send was not what you expected. It was not "I miss you." It was not "Please come back." It was not even "I'm sorry." It was something much harder. "I owe you the truth." And the moment those words appeared on the screen, they stared at them as if they had just opened a door they had spent months trying to keep locked. Their heart began pounding, their hands trembled. For several seconds, they did nothing. Then they added another sentence. "I was afraid that if I told you, you would never look at me the same way again." They stopped, read it, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again, because even now, fear was fighting for control. But something inside them had reached its limit, the silence had become unbearable, and perhaps this is the part of the story where you need to understand something deeper, my child. People often imagine that the hardest moment is receiving painful news. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the hardest moment comes afterward. It is the moment when you have to tell someone who matters, the moment when you have to accept that your choices may have consequences, the moment when you can no longer hide behind distance, the moment when the person you love becomes entitled to the truth you were afraid to give them. And that was the battle happening inside this fictional soulmate. They were not fighting you, they were fighting themselves. Every excuse they had created was collapsing. Every reason they had used to justify waiting was becoming weaker. "I'll tell them tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week. "I need to understand everything first." Understanding became another excuse for delay. "I don't want to hurt them." But silence had already caused harm. "I need to protect them." But protection without honesty had become control, and now they were finally seeing it. The truth was not going to become less frightening because they waited, it was only becoming heavier. My beloved child, imagine for a moment the room around them. The lights are low. The world outside continues as if nothing has happened. Cars move down distant streets. People laugh somewhere. Someone is preparing dinner. Someone is watching television. Someone is falling asleep without knowing. Almost.